I'm Marshall Kozloff.
And I'm Mike Duran.
Welcome back to Counterbalance. I unfortunately could not make this episode, so Mike, you flew entirely solo. So what I'll do here is introduce the topic for both myself and then the audience. You spoke with Gadi Taub. He's based in Israel. He covers the Israeli political system. What were you looking to do when you had this conversation?
First of all, Gadi Taub is one of my favorite people in the world. I keep saying that, don't I? I said that on Ed Hussein too. I'm actually not one of those people that has, 20 favorite people in the world. But no, Gadi is just a wonderful guy. He's very interesting to me because he came also from the political left. He's a professor at Hebrew University, which is almost entirely left wing. He writes for Haaretz, which is the New York Times of Israel. He's a screenwriter. In social life, I think he's very liberal, but in politics, he's gotten increasingly right wing. In fact, there's hardly a day goes by. It's very funny in Haaretz when there isn't a headline that says Taub, you're totally wrong about X, because it drives people nuts that he has this platform in Haaretz, and he's also playing a pretty significant role in Israel in the intellectual fights because of this platform that he has. So I just wanted to check in with him and see how he's feeling about things.
That's great. And then to follow up on that, what would you say is the main takeaway for the U.S.-centric audience that we have?
Well, I tried to kind of make those points in the conversation. The thing that I want people to realize is that the picture that we're getting of Israel from our mainstream media is a distorted picture because in the last 10, 15 years, Israeli politics there's been a sea change in Israeli politics. And the old left-right boundaries that people are still familiar with in America, don't exist anymore. But it's very hard to see that because of this incredibly fragmented party political system that they have. It's ridiculously fragmented, and it distorts people's picture because they can't see that there's now a kind of right of center consensus across many different parties, including some of those that are positioning themselves as the big opposition to Netanyahu on all of the questions of national security. They are now actually right of center as we traditionally think about it. But the real left-wing parties like Labor and Meretz, which now command a tiny minority of seats in the Knesset, their worldview is still the one that you're finding on the pages of the Wall Street, of the New York Times, and of the Washington Post, and so forth. And that's what interests me. It's kind of hard to convey that in a single conversation, but I think we got there to a certain extent.
That's really helpful. So with all that, let's dive into the episode. Of course, huge thank you to the Hudson Institute for supporting this podcast. Hope you enjoy the episode.
All right, Gadi Taub, welcome to Counterbalance.
Hi, Mike. Thank you for having me.
So listen, you guys are having a huge mess over there in Israel. You've had 4 elections in about 2 weeks, right? No, 2 years, I think. And they're having a difficulty forming a government. So I thought what I might do here just to get us rolling is just explain to the viewers and to myself and to you why it's so hard to form a government, and then we'll see what your reaction is. Okay?
Okay.
All right. So basically, the politics in Israel now, more than left and right, is breaking down along lines of pro-Netanyahu and anti-Netanyahu. And there's a pro-Netanyahu bloc that has 59 seats. And it needs, in order to have a majority, it has to have 61. And now the problem that they're having is that when they look at all the potential partners that could join with the bloc to take them to 61, the potential partners are either just theoretical partners that don't really want to participate in the bloc, or if they participate, then they're going to alienate somebody who's in the bloc. So, for example, partner number one would be the United Arab List. These are the Islamists. They have 4 seats that would take the pro Netanyahu bloc to 63 seats, but that would then alienate the religious Zionists, represented most prominently by Smotrich.
Yeah, he's in fact he vetoed it completely. He said this is
yeah. I can't sit with them. So then that leads us to partner number 2, which is the New Hope Party, Gideon Sa'ar. And Gideon Sa'ar, he said that he won't participate in a Netanyahu-led government. He's a renegade from the Likud, from Netanyahu's Likud, and he's against Netanyahu, and he won't participate. And the third option
that's
is
his only principle. His only principle is no Netanyahu. Yeah.
All right. Then the next one is Avigdor Lieberman. He's got 7 seats, but he's he's secular and Russian. He doesn't like the religious parties. He doesn't like Netanyahu either, but I think he could get over that, perhaps. But he won't sit with the religious parties, and so they won't sit with him.
I think the anti-Netanyahu sentiment is stronger than the religious parties, because everyone thought he would join the coalition in the first round in April 19. And he surprised everyone because he's considered to be right-wing. And notice the whole thing is there is a huge right-wing majority, but Netanyahu is unable to form a government, although he is clearly the leader of the right. And maybe one way to understand this Israel is very small and our system doesn't kick people out. Ariel Sharon used to say, the only thing you have to do is cling to the wheel. It will turn and one day you will rise with it. And unlike the American system, where if you lose as a nominee for the presidency, you're kicked out and you don't hear from you again. In our system, everyone stays forever. So if you're a Machiavellian like Netanyahu, which Netanyahu is very good at calculating at every specific spot, that he doesn't need to reward those who are loyal to him because they're loyal to him. He needs to reward those who he needs to make loyal to him. So at every point, those closest to him become, in the end, his greatest enemies. And trouble is that they stay around, and he's been in politics for decades now, and all this, I don't know, I don't want to name it by names, but he's been collecting enemies, and some of these Gideon Sa'ar, he's a right-wing person, and we need now a strong national government, because I don't know if you heard, there's a new administration in America, and we are not exactly happy with it here in Israel, and we're going to need strong leadership. And Gideon Sa'ar is willing to burn the house down just not to let Netanyahu become prime minister.
Okay, now why don't you let's go into some of the personalities a little bit, because I don't think you can understand any of this without it. And you've already started with Sa'ar, so let's talk a little bit more about him. The only principle he has is no Netanyahu. Mm-hmm. However, I thought it was interesting that when the president polled all of the party leaders about who they would nominate to be the first person to put together a government, Sa'ar nominated no one. I mean, if he was really wanted to take down Netanyahu, he could have nominated Lapid, the leader of the largest opposition party, but party in opposition to Netanyahu. But he didn't. Therefore, allowing Netanyahu to have the first go around at forming a government. So he's kind of already, if his principle is taking down Netanyahu, he's kind of already shown himself to be a bit ineffective. No.
I'm not sure, because all it takes, he is the only one standing between Netanyahu and a government, because Naftali Bennett and the religious Zionists have already said that if Netanyahu can form a government, they will join him. So Gideon Sa'ar is the only thing separating Netanyahu from a government. The other option being, as you mentioned, the Arab parties, which we can get into later. But what Sa'ar did is he's trying to preserve the facade that he is not an enabler of a government dominated by the left. So he would not name Yair Lapid because he doesn't want Labor and Meretz, the socialist and progressives, by and large, riding into the government on his tail. So he's sort of maybe letting it happen, but trying to minimize his responsibility for it.
Okay, so now he has the 6 seats. What's to keep Netanyahu from just poaching some of those, some of his supporters, who were all former Likud people anyway? There's no ideological difference between them, right?
Yeah,
so
he's doing it. I'm as we speak. I have no doubt. I have no. I'm not privy to any information that's not in the press, but it's absolutely certain that this is what he's doing now.
He's tried to entice seats away from Saar.
Because Saar with his anti-Netanyahu stance, what did he do? He was the contender for leadership in Likud and therefore contender for future prime minister. And now he formed a party, and he went on some very low grade popular TV show, and he signed a paper live on air saying he will not sit with Netanyahu. So you think, what is this guy doing? If he ever wants to become the leader, the prime minister, he is a right winger. He would need the right wing votes, but now he alienated almost the whole of the right, and he's now only his only fuel is now those few strategic voters who thought it's worth voting for a right winger because it would take away from, which it did, it would take away a bite from the Netanyahu bloc, exactly the bite that he needs to become prime minister. So now Gideon Saar, nobody's going to vote for him in the next round. He maneuvered himself into an impossible corner. Only left-wing people are now supporting him. So who is the left that's going to vote for a right when it's not even a strategic vote?
It's funny. I mean, you mentioned that Netanyahu was very Machiavellian. Netanyahu seems to thrive in these environments. I mean, he has a survival instinct, and combined with an ability to force errors on his to force his rivals into making errors. That's really just remarkable.
And he has more patience. He's cool-headed. He makes precise calculations. He is completely flexible tactically. But don't get me wrong, because Netanyahu is, I think, very, very ideological. So he's Machiavellian in his tactics, but his strategy, he doesn't lose sight of the important things. Now, the important things, you and I have talked about this a lot. I read your Twitter feed and I see you read mine. So we've been talking a lot about the one existential threat to Israel now, which is Iran. And Netanyahu is only interested in that. He's willing to juggle everything else because he thinks this is the one thing Israel should be adamant about, because if you look at the broader map, if Jordan collapses the way Syria did, and the Iranian proxies thrive, and the Muslim Brotherhood, and also as some Israeli believe, Turkey, so we will be surrounded by radical Islam. And for Netanyahu, this is our problem. So Gideon Saar, for him, it might have been a voodoo doll. He doesn't mind. He would say anything. He would flatter him with anything, and he can do these things when he's. Those people who say he's dishonest mean that he's very flexible in his Machiavellian politics, but not because he's cynical, but because he's highly ideological and has very, I think, realistic priorities.
Now, help me understand one person on the map here that I have to admit that I have no interest in him whatsoever. But I have to, when I look at the numbers, he's a significant person, and that's Yair Lapid. I keep waiting for Yair Lapid to disappear, as a lot of Israeli politicians do, but he doesn't, and he has a large number of seats, 17 seats. To me, he just looks like he's a very handsome man, television personality, but I can't understand what people vote for when they vote for Yair Lapid. So if you're somebody in Israel and Tel Aviv, you go and you vote for Yair Lapid, what do you think you're doing?
His campaign slogan was sanity. Vote for sanity. I'm normal. It's normality. And Yair Lapid is as flexible as Netanyahu, but without a strategic goal. The only strategic goal being the prime minister's seat. I always imagine. I don't know if it's polite to say this, but I imagine him shaving one morning, looking in the mirror, and then calling his wife and saying, "Come here, Lee. Do I look like a prime minister?" And this is how it all started. It's a celebrity prime minister, and he wants this on his CV. And the last round of election, and I'm saying to people, because people say he's a liar because he says one thing and then says the opposite. And I say he's not a liar. He's completely postmodern. He believes everything he says at the moment he says it, and he can say the exact opposite one moment after that. The last round of election, when we had the same deadlock, more or less, and they wanted to break it by an alliance with the anti-Zionist Arab parties. Before the election, on the eve of the election, he said to a journalist, "Stop with this Netanyahu lies. We've said 1,000 times, we will never sit with him. We will never lean on their votes." And one day after the election, or 2 days after the election, he said, "Why are you ruling out the Arab? Are you racist? What is this thing?" So it is the exact opposite, and he didn't bat an eye. He's a television personality, as you said, and whatever's on the teleprompter, he can read it with the same sincerity.
But he does appeal to the secular vote, no? Is it
to the Yappy Tel Aviv liberal vote, and he knows how to manipulate that, because he's a creature of strategic advisors. All these wise policy wonks and PR people, and they just devise this all Israeli handsome guy who will and his whole shtick is Netanyahu is corrupt. So the idea is Netanyahu is dirty, Yair Lapid is clean, and he will bring us back to normality.
Okay, now let's just hit a couple more of these personalities quickly. So the guy that everyone is talking about on the right is Naftali Bennett, and they're talking about him. A lot of people are talking about him as the kingmaker in all of this. I mean, they would need him to put together an anti-Netanyahu bloc. They would need Bennett. Bennett is saying he won't do that. But who knows what he would really do in the end. I can't see how with his religious Zionist following, he would ever sit together with a bunch of left-wing parties in order to bring down Netanyahu. Am I wrong about that?
No, I don't think you're wrong. If you look at his Twitter feed, his profile on Twitter now says a contender or a nominee for prime minister. He had in the polls, he had 20-something seats a few months ago. Remember, our parliament is 120 seats, so 20 is more than what Yair Lapid got. And he's down to 7. And Naftali Bennett is well known for being very successful on the polls and not on the actual votes.
How do you explain that?
There are a lot of floating, what we call floating votes, and apparently what the surveys pick up is not what people will actually vote when it comes down to it, but what they at some moment vote against. So a lot of people answer differently on the surveys, and a lot of things start with a big promise, and people in Israel, remember, politics is often literally a matter of life and death here. So people get very serious when they actually go to vote. So, and Naftali Bennett has also wavered on every important issue. He and his partner Ayelet Shaked have done so much political maneuvering, and this is because, as one of our best commentators, Amit Segal from Channel 12, remarked here, Naftali Bennett is trying to do two things that are contradictory. He comes from the religious Zionist sector, so he headed a religious Zionist party, and he tried to make that a mainstream party without losing his sector. And you can't do both in Israeli politics. And this is why he ends up with, he might be now wiped out.
Well, you can do both in the sense that Netanyahu has. I mean, Netanyahu represents the right-wing bloc that moves from secular to religious Zionist. He doesn't wear a knitted skull cap, but he does have. What you're saying is that Bennett wants to be the replacement for Netanyahu, but with the knitted skull cap. You can't do it from a sectoral party. You have to do it from a centrist party.
Exactly.
But he's trying to position himself to be the successor to Netanyahu. Is that right?
Yeah, but he keeps wavering and appealing to a sector. When you appeal to a sector, you promise to represent sectorial interests. When you go to a mainstream party, you are already a coalition. You are already a compromise. So the Likud and the Likud is also becoming, or it has been for a while, but ever more clearly becoming the working class party. And it's striking because when Gideon Sa'ar is a yuppie character, he hangs out with the journalists and all, like the upper class entertainment people, Tel Aviv clubs and restaurants and all the rest.
His wife is a TV personality.
Yeah, and a very good anchor woman. And Bennett represents the high-tech sector. He's not so much, everybody laughs at how small his skull cap is. It's almost disappearing. So he's from the high-tech sector. And as Avi Bareli, one of the wisest commentators in Israel, who writes for Israel Hayom, he's a professor of Israeli history and the foremost historian of the labor movement. And he said, look at what's going on. What has happened is that on the right, the elites, those who can join or are part of the elites, are at least flirting with the bloc of the left. And the left here controls the power centers of the elites, the academia, journalism, arts, the judiciary, and so forth. And the Likud is staying a popular movement. And as someone like myself who moved from the left to the right and have always been political and have been going to demonstrations all my life, I told my friends that when you go to a Likud demonstration, you come back home with other people's sweat. Because people hug you, because it's a completely different atmosphere. It's not, these righteous stuck-up people in Rabin Square still demanding, still pretending that the Palestinians are aiming for peace. So Naftali Bennett is in a sense part of the elite. It's like he's demanding to be the prime minister, having won 7 seats out of 120. Compared to Netanyahu's 30. So, but he holds the key, so he thinks he can leverage it. And I'm not very good at analyzing the micro. I was going to say microaggressions. It's not the right term.
The micro calculations of
yeah. But I can tell you from the bird's eye view what I see, and this does not make sense. You cannot become prime minister on 7 seats. So now,
if you go back and look over the last after the last 5-7 years at how many different political parties Naftali Bennett has started, it's really remarkable. And he keeps saying it's like some of these bands from the 1970s that you're right.
And he's from the startup nation, the high-tech sector. And he said on Twitter, I'll run the country like a high-tech company. And Ran Baratz, also a smart commentator on the right, Dr. Ran Baratz, said a state is not a high-tech company. A high-tech company takes high risks and high gambles to make huge exits, but they usually all go bankrupt, like 90% of them. You can't gamble on the state. And Naftali Bennett, but let me say just these two competing interpretations, which I've heard from people who have talked to him. So I don't know, he's saying different things apparently to different people. So one interpretation says Naftali Bennett thinks, remember, he's from the elite unit that Netanyahu came from, so he's supposedly cool-headed. And one version is he said he's now waiting for Netanyahu to crack, or for the Likud to crack and kick out Netanyahu. Because without Netanyahu, Saar would come. If he thinks that the Netanyahu loyalists are going to just kick out Netanyahu for someone with 7 seats, he's dreaming. And the other idea is a rotation government, which I'm told Netanyahu agreed to do, which means he will be prime minister, and after 2 years, he will rotate and change with Naftali Bennett. But Bennett is demanding to be first. Now, Netanyahu knows that usually you don't get to be second in rotation. You can only get it if you're first. You get rotation, then election.
Yeah, so, I mean, Netanyahu's concept of rotation is, I take the prime ministership and you sit and rotate. And then
exactly. But he thinks that the argument is, if Netanyahu concedes and lets Bennett be first, then Bennett can bring Gideon Saar, because Gideon Saar committed not to sit under Netanyahu, but under Bennett it would be fine. So he says to Netanyahu, if you just do that, you will have a right-wing government that's stable and steady and with a stable right-wing majority.
Okay, listen. Let me test one theory about Bennett with you, and then we'll move on to some kind of bigger issues here.
Sure.
Here's how I feel looking at Israel from a distance. I do feel that Naftali Bennett's views, and I forget about all of his, political machinations, but his views on the issues and everything pretty much represents where the center of gravity in Israeli politics is today. And first of all, do you agree with that? And then I have a follow-on on that.
He even leans to the right, because in terms of the great controversy, the controversy over the future of the Judea and Samaria, he's for annexation of all Area C, which is the great majority of the territory not populated by Palestinians.
But so I know he leans to the right, but what I'm trying to say, that my point is that I wanted to get to is that, to me, there is you look at the Israeli party landscape, and Israeli politics is incredibly fragmented because of the nature of the system with the low threshold and so forth. But in terms of people's views, it's obvious when you look at the numbers here that consistently, election after election, Israel is a center-right country.
Yeah,
and the reason I stress that is because, I think a lot of Americans get their news about Israel from the New York Times, the Washington Post, and they are deeply influenced by Haaretz, a paper you've probably heard of, and by people whose views really are in line with Meretz and Labor, who are relatively insignificant players in Israeli politics these days, but they remain extremely influential intellectually, particularly in the diaspora, I think. You agree with that?
Yeah, I do, because the diaspora is still pretending that the two-state solution is an option, and those are the only parties that still somehow cling to that. And since the public has realized that there are no Palestinian partners that do not want peace, no one is voting for them. So together, Labor and Meretz have 14 seats, about 10%.
Well, so that's exactly the point that I'm trying to make, is that if you read the New York Times, you get a very, very skewed understanding. So a guy like, to a New York Times reader, a guy like Bennett looks like he's an extreme right-wing person, but he's a lot closer to the center in Israeli politics. The center in Israeli politics has moved. Okay, so
one thing about Bennett before we leave him, because Bennett, about 3 months ago, something like that, maybe more, or maybe it was half a year, he published a book called How to Defeat the Corona. So this was going to be his agenda, how to defeat COVID-19. And he published a book about it. And then Netanyahu got everyone vaccinated. So this was going to be the big agenda, was going to be forget all the controversies between right and left. We're going to concentrate on defeating COVID-19. And this was just taken from under his feet. So then he ran on a platform of back to economic normality. But he didn't even say what his views are. It's a party that mostly just folded all its right-wing flags.
Huh. Netanyahu, it really is a remarkable figure. I really do think he's the most talented politician on the world scene today. I mean, he really, no offense to Israel, but he really deserves a bigger platform for his talent, I think, in a way. I mean, this political mess that you guys have.
How about the American presidency, Mike? If you take him as an American president, it's going to solve our coalition problems too. Consider it.
Yeah, you could do that. But he has a remarkable ability to just kind of keep on top of this game all the time, and just with his little fingers spin these guys all around all the time. These are intelligent, clever people who are scheming all the time to bring him down, and they just can't do it. What do you think is his superpower?
I don't know. You interviewed him, so you got a sense of the guy. First of all, he is. If you ask him in a quiet settings, when he's very in campaigns, he's very focused on one-liner messages, and you can't move him from them. But if you had a conversation like the conversation you had with him, if you catch him to a quiet conversation and ask him what's the most important thing a leader needs, so he would quote his father, who was a professor of history, who said to him, if you want to be a leader, what is the single thing that's most important that you need is education. And Netanyahu reads profusely. I gave him a volume of a book, a scholarly book that I once edited, and he read it. It was about the Enlightenment, and he read it, and he had things to say about it, and you would never catch him without a book. So he has a sophisticated, nuanced, detailed picture of the world, and he can assess the larger forces. So he doesn't lose focus, and it's very hard, when you're in the middle of a constant storm, to actually see above the hurricane and and look and get a picture of the universe. So that's one thing. The other thing is he is absolutely dedicated. Look what is happening now. He's on trial, and still, and people have said you can't lead a government while you're on trial, because half your mind is focused on your legal defense. And still, with that, we managed to get vaccinated before the whole world. If you look at the graphs of new cases of COVID-19 and deaths, the whole world has this wobbly graph, and Israel just plummeting like a fallen airplane. And so how did he do it? There was Channel 12, curiously, they're really against him, but they brought, not as hostile as the Haaretz, but very hostile. They interviewed the CEO of Pfizer and asked him, why did Netanyahu get this deal from you? All the world wants this vaccine. And he said, look, this guy is obsessive. He called me 30 times. He called me, he said, at 3 a.m.
Anything to get the telephone to stop ringing.
And he said he called me at 3 a.m. to ask me if it's dangerous to pregnant women. And I told him, he said, Prime Minister, it's 3 a.m. in the morning. I can't speak now. And Netanyahu just wouldn't let go. And he said, in the end, he convinced me that Israel would give me the most accurate data and that I could trust him that he would follow through on his promises. And so we agreed. For some Americans probably would have never agreed to what we agreed. It was to give the data about how the vaccine works. It's a mild breach of personal privacy. But Netanyahu was focused like laser on getting us out of this, and he wouldn't let go. And he's like that. And this is why people around him are often so highly offended, because he doesn't. The goal. People are dispensable means for the goal, and the goal. And this sounds very cruel, but it sounds Stalinist. But no. But the goal is Israeli democracy. The goal is. And this someone told me, someone who was very close to him and also now hates him vehemently, told him, Netanyahu, when he shaves and he looks in the mirror in the morning, he sees Moses. Now, I'm sure that's an exaggeration, but it also conveys the gist of it. For Netanyahu, he has historical perspective. There's 3,500 years of history, and he is now carrying this the safety of the Jewish people, and he has to pass this to the next generation, and all the rest is not important. So when you think of that, you can't help not admiring him, at least in part, because he sacrificed everything personally. This trial is going to, I don't know, is going to eat him up alive. But he's focused on the Iran issue, and if he can stay 3 more months and take care of it, he trusts only himself.
Now you mentioned here the trial. I don't want to go too deeply into that, partly because it bores me. The actual details of all the different indictments. But you know, I noticed. I know you. Obviously, you are a Netanyahu supporter, but a lot of people in Israeli politics are saying the exact opposite of what you said, which is that you know, he only cares about his own personal future. And he's putting, in order to save himself in the trial, he's holding Israeli politics hostage. And for the good of the country, he should really step down. I mean, there's just a ton of articles in the Israeli press all the time. They're saying, really, you stop winning such a large percentage of the vote because you're getting in the way of Israeli democracy. So what just quickly for our listeners, give us your take on that whole line of reasoning. You see that a lot in the American press too, of course.
He can easily get out from all his legal predicaments by stepping down. Someone from the general attorney's office, stupidly, she retired, and then she said, just before the first round of election, when she was asked what would the indictments be about, so she said something, it's not a good exact quote, but it's a paraphrase. She said they would be heavy if he stays prime minister and light if he steps down, which is almost tantamount to admit, we're going to take you down. If you just move now, then we won't exact a big price of you, because we just need to take you down.
She basically admitted that the indictments are a political instrument rather than a serious legal instrument.
So if he would cared only about himself, he could get a plea deal and get out now, but he's not willing to do it. And partly we have a huge issue with the Israeli. If you think Crossfire Hurricane is scary, I don't know if you do. I think it is.
You're talking about Russiagate, not the Rolling Stones song.
Then the Israeli our FBI or our Attorney General office and Justice Department are way stronger, and Netanyahu has let them become so powerful that there is almost nothing to stop them in anything. And historians will look back and say this is poetic justice, because they have, and I'm quoting someone who has been the Minister of Justice from a very thick book called the Purse and the Sword by Daniel Friedman, Professor Daniel Friedman, who was our Minister of Justice, who has shown that they have taken down anyone who wanted to reform the justice system in order to make it less political and less powerful. So Netanyahu always thought, I'm not going to mess with them and they will never mess with me. And he was wrong. And when they harassed others, he either protected them or just stood aside. And now they are targeting him. And a lot of people feel that, contrary to what the line of the press is, that he should step down and then all the trouble will be over and we can take care of the country and all the rest of it. People feel that now, even if I hate Netanyahu, if we want our democracy back, we need to limit the power of the judiciary and the attorney general, and we have the legal counsel to the government, which is a whole arm of government. We can't get into it now, but people are standing behind Netanyahu, and everyone says, people have told me that Netanyahu never took care of this issue. And why do I think that now he would? Well, because now it's his own throat. And one thing you can trust every person to take care of is their own throat.
So you're a supporter of Netanyahu, obviously, but I noticed lately on your Twitter feed that you've been very critical of his flirtation with the United Arab List. Yep. And so maybe you could talk to us a little bit about that. It's also a very interesting subject, the whole the changing role of the Arab parties in Israeli politics.
Yeah, the Arab parties, all of them are anti-Zionists, which is, by the way, illegal. That they don't recognize our right to self-determination. They don't recognize the legitimacy of the Jewish nation. When you say all right, you mean the Jews, yeah. Yeah, the Jewish nation state. They don't recognize its legitimacy. So the Jewish people is not a people in their view, and this is illegal in Israel. But Israel is also very tolerant, and also the court imposed them on us. So while according to our quasi-constitution, they shouldn't have been running with these platforms. At least they are in the parliament, but we always took it for granted that they are outside the left. And they can support a government from outside without being part of the coalition. That is, they can form a bloc with a coalition, not to let the other side get a majority of the parliament. So, but now everybody was applauding this development that Ram, the Joint Arab List, which are sort of the local branch of the Muslim Brotherhood, have adopted a civil agenda and said, we will join that coalition which gives prosperity to the Arab sector. We don't care about the Palestinian peoplehood. We're not going to fight against the idea of Zionism. We're going to be pragmatic. And this is an excellent development among the voters. But it's not the right address for that, because Ra'am, the Muslim Brotherhood, the way it works is it creates a sectoral a medinat revacha. Help me with this.
What do you call it? Welfare state.
Welfare state. I don't know. I was blanking on that. And they create a sectoral Muslim welfare state where they support the population economically in exchange for the access to indoctrinating it through mosques and schools and so forth.
So whereas some people would look at this and say, "Hey, this is a very interesting and positive development," because these, in the past, a lot of the Arab parties, the national leaders, have taken sort of Palestinian nationalist positions to the disadvantage of local communities getting a piece of the pie. And so now there's a tendency to want to, first of all, the Arab sector, the Arab societies, communities, they have They have their economic position has improved by leaps and bounds in the last few years
Under Netanyahu,
and
because of
under
Netanyahu government.
And they're starting to participate in, for lack of a better word, Zionist politics, and in order just to look after their local interests. So a lot of people would look at that and say that's a very positive thing, and you're seeing the glass half full here. Half empty. I would tend to see it half full, actually, and be more inclined to go along with Netanyahu in integrating the United Arab List. But you would look at this and say, no, this is a Trojan horse.
Yeah, because I do think this is a positive development among their voters. But this party is a very sly thing. It is a racist party. It is anti-Semitic. Its members just now participated in a welcoming parade for terrorists who murdered innocent children, women, and old people just because they are Jews. So the thing is, if the right wing builds a coalition with them, what will happen structurally is that they would now sit in the middle and be the kingmakers, so that both blocks would be courting them. What this would mean is that we are giving the balance to the Muslim Brotherhood, whose long-run goal is our extermination. And it could drive this wedge by notch, deeper and deeper to divide us. So while this is why I thought the law should be applied, that if that's your platform, you can't run for the parliament, so as to enable the moderate forces in the Arab community, which are growing stronger all the time, to channel themselves to something that is not the goal of which is not fanatical religious Islam, because this is the ultra nationalist, quasi fascist agenda that is bent on exterminating the Jewish state. So it's when you took these positions against Netanyahu, did you get any heat from other Netanyahu supporters? Yeah, a little bit, but many understand this. And here, I don't think we can think of this as a sacrifice in the short run, which will pay in the long run. This would be a sacrifice in the short run that we would pay very steeply in the long run. And I think that here Netanyahu's judgment is not sound. So I'm not a representative of any party. And as a pundit, I express my opinions, but I don't commit myself institutionally to anyone. So I feel free to criticize the Likud policy when I think it's going the wrong way.
So Gandhi, let me put to you a theoretical proposition, because you've got the United Arab List on the one hand, and many of the potential or reliable supporters of Netanyahu are going to be as uncomfortable making a government with them as you are. Mm-hmm. And then you've got Smotrich and the religious Zionists on the far right. And Smotrich has said, no way will he sit with the United Arab List. What if the United Arab List and Smotrich, neither one of them joined the government, and you had a minority government that doesn't have 61 votes, but could pass in the government, but could pass, would have a majority of support in order to form the government. Is that a possibility? So neither one of them, so Smotrich can say, okay, I didn't break my promise, I won't sit with them.
I don't think it's a matter of being pedantic about principles. I think it's a mechanical matter. If you let this radical Islamist anti-Zionist party, whatever lip service it pays now, if you let these supporters of terrorism become the kingmakers in the structure of the leadership of the Zionist project, then you are in deep trouble, because they will be able to pay an exact, and they will hold you hostage. So imagine we're going into, like, according to, I guess, American leaks, we've been attacking Iranian vessels in the Red Sea, in the Persian Gulf, in Iranian forces in Syria. Imagine that we have to fight radical Islam in an almost under the radar war while we are hostages to the Muslim Brotherhood. Of course, these are Sunnis and these are Shiites, but as we saw from Iran's support of Hamas, it's like giving it's like saying Hezbollah in Europe have this trick where they say, well, there's the political branch and there's the military branch. And so you can just be friends with the political branch, but it's the same organization. So we're going to let an arm of Hamas decide the limits of Israeli policy. This seems to me insane.
So what do you say to the people on the left or even centrists who look at Smotrich and the religious Zionists, and they make exactly the same argument? They say these people are Kahanists, they are radical right-wing parties that have no place in mainstream politics, and it's unacceptable to have a government that would be founded with their support.
I would say that that on the margin of that party, there are elements, they're not Kahanist, because if they were, they would be ruled out of the from running to the parliament. So there's one guy, Itamar Ben-Gvir, who was a Kahanist in his youth and has since renounced it, and I don't like his politics one bit. You cannot have an explicit racist policy unless it's anti-Semitic, which we ignore. That's the Arab parties. By the way, some Jewish members too in the communist faction, Hadash. There's a Hebrew professor, a Hebrew university professor, who is a radical communist. But on the left, you can. On the right, you can't have that. If anyone harbors explicitly racist notions, then the Supreme Court will remove them. There would be an appeal to the Supreme Court, and they would be removed. Do I like them? No. I understand why this coalition was formed. This or the coalition within Smotrich's party. By the way, the leadership didn't want this guy in. But what has happened with our strange...
Ben-Gvir, you mean?
Ben-Gvir, yeah. Because we have a percentage threshold, and Ben-Gvir, what he did last time is they left him out, and he ran till the end. And he wasted...
Siphoned votes away from the right-wing bloc.
Yeah, so he basically, he's basically holding the right hostage. Now, note that the left is always leaning on the racists in the Arab parties. There was Hamashutefet. They have been 15 at their largest. There have been 15 members of Knesset who are clearly, you read their platforms there for the right of return. They think Israel should not be a Jewish state. They support terror, whatever. And the left, and that's all right for the left to lean on them. But Ben-Gvir, this is the most outrageous thing. And if you read Haaretz, where I write, you would think that that racism is flourishing on the right. No, it's flourishing on the left. And on the right, there is someone who used to be quite disgusting, but still had to renounce all these positions in order to become part of the Smotrich party, which itself made a face and finally admitted him.
Okay, made a face, meaning they held their nose and let him in. So yeah,
in Hebrew you say, as you know, we say asa partzuf, so I tend to translate literally.
So I guess we better say goodbye to each other soon. Let me just ask you a couple questions about yourself in case people are curious, because you mentioned that you write for Haaretz. Haaretz is the New York Times of Israel. I mean, I think that's a perfect analogy. The same people from the same social and cultural background read Haaretz as read the New York Times, and it has the same attitude toward Trump, Netanyahu, that the New York Times has. But you write for Haaretz, and you're a professor at the Hebrew University, which is also a bastion of liberalism. And you're a screenwriter and so on. So how did you end up being such a right-wing nut?
Facts.
And
if I may quote Thomas Sowell, facts.
Why are you a right-wing nut? And how is it that they let you into these places?
Well, they let me into these places before I was a right-wing nut. And what happened to me is I just basically progressively gave up on the idea of peace with the Palestinians because the Palestinians have been consistently refusing it. And the Palestinian national movement is bent on the destruction of Zionism, not the independence of Palestinians. So it was... I supported Oslo, and then buses exploded, and then I supported unilateralism, and then we got rockets in return, and then there was the so-called Arab Spring on Obama's watch, and I saw that that nationalism is not a stabilizing principle in the Arab region. As Bernard Lewis once said, there are only 4 nation states in this region: Egypt, Israel, Turkey, and Iran. All the rest, he said, are tribes with flags. So we can't trust, there's lava here that's melting all political structures, and it can just flood our little, very tiny country. People think Israel because they see it on the news all the time. It looks like a cockroach on a map if you look at the Middle East. That's the size. And so realism and just the fear of chaos in this region have made me more and more conservative and hawkish, but hawkish not in the sense that I am pro-war. I'm just pro-defense and a pessimist.
Okay. How many people are there like you among your friends who migrated from left to right?
Well, are you asking about the covert ones, or also the overt ones, or also those who are in the closet? Because there are many in the closet.
I used to get those, not so much anymore, because I used to be a professor where people call you up and privately on the telephone tell you they agree with you, but won't be seen with you in public.
Yeah, exactly. So they keep up the good work. Yeah, keep fighting them, but they just avoid you. And it happened to me with very prominent intellectuals here. So it's really embarrassing that you have these conversations with them, and then they would not have anything to do with you in public. But a lot of people have come out of the closet, and I'm making fun of the people who won't, but I have a secure tenure job, and some people are just worried for their livelihood. So I can understand this because in many branches, like if you work in screenwriting, as I do, there are just, I don't know, there are less than a handful of right-wing screenwriters, and there are definitely many people who will never hire you for that. And I don't know if I would have been accepted to my university job had I not been back then a centrist. I was never, 25 years ago, I wrote a book against political correctness in 97. That's before I came to study in an American university and realized how suffocating PC was. When I was in an American history program, from all our class, there were only 2 students who were willing to say anything good about America. Me and the Japanese guy doing diplomatic history. That's all.
All right. Well, I think we've probably gone over time now. So thanks a lot for giving us all this time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Mike. It was a pleasure.
I wish you luck in all of your in all of your wars, all of your intellectual wars.
Many thanks.
All right. On behalf of Marshall too, I'll say goodbye to you, and thanks a lot.
Thanks.
Well, that about does it for today. We hope you enjoyed this episode. As a reminder, please make sure to subscribe wherever you find your podcasts. If you want to learn more, you can come see us at hudson.org. Please leave us a rating, a 5-star rating, if you feel so inclined. If you don't feel so inclined, please leave us a 5-star rating, and we'll see you next week.